Okay, so let's start. Back. Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you for joining us in today's Intern Talk. I am your host, Christian Catan, and I proudly welcome you all to our second Intern Talk, the culminating activity and final presentation of our two interns. These two are actually my first interns. They have been with us for over 3 months, I guess. And they did this length of internship not as a part of any requirement but voluntarily. So the internship program of the Intramuros Administration is handled under the Center for Intramuros Studies. The program is a research-oriented learning opportunity for interns to work directly with the administration in its work in directing the orderly development and restoration of the walled city. As such, the administration is investing in getting students and emerging professionals exposed to Intramuros studies, Manila Studies, and Heritage Management. The administration's internship program challenges interns to apply and hone their current skills in research and development. And with that, let's go over the program flow for this activity. Okay, so we are currently at the introduction part, and we will next have the first presentation by Shane Lim entitled Rethinking Walled City, Introducing Circular Framework in the Built Environment of Intramuros. This will be followed by a discussion with our invited panelists, and then we will proceed with the next presentation by Angeline Zialcita entitled The Potential Impact of the Parex Proposal on Cultural Significance of Intramuros. After both presentations and their respective panel discussions, we will then proceed to accommodate questions from the audience during the open forum. Then at 3:50 p.m., we will conclude this activity. So to cap the introduction part, let us go over the house rules. So for Zoom attendees, you may raise your questions via the Q&A button at the bottom of our screen, while for those viewing us via Facebook Live, you may raise your questions in the comment section. If you wish to remain anonymous, please let us know, or you may opt to change your name. Also, only those who have successfully registered and viewed on Zoom will be eligible to get a certificate. A feedback form will be emailed to you after the session, and this certificate will be sent within a week. Lastly, please note that this webinar is recorded and the recording shall be made permanently available in IA social media channels. So, okay, let us proceed. Our first presentation is entitled Rethinking the Walled City, Introducing the Circular Framework in the Built Environment of Intramuros. This study aims to critique the linear economy framework and in the process produce a circular framework specifically for Intramuros. For this paper, we will have Shane Belle Lim. Shane Lim is an architecture student specializing in architectural heritage from the LaSalle College of St. Benilde. She has a passion for creative problem-solving pursuits both in the built environment and visual communication fields. As such, she is set to actualize one of her aspirations to contribute to Philippines' motion towards sustainable architecture through solution-based design. So, without further ado, Shane, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me just share my screen. Okay. Is it shown already? Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shane, and today I shall share with you my research entitled Rethinking the Walled City, Introducing the Circular Framework in the Preservation and Development of Intramuros' Built Environment. As such, this presentation shall be guided under 4 main chapters, namely the introduction, defining Intramuros, innovating Intramuros, and finally the conclusion. So to begin, let me first ask a few questions that you may answer to yourselves or to the chat box if you're feeling a bit brave today. First, are you aware of the climate change phenomenon? Second, have you ever noted or experienced the effects it has on your daily life? And lastly, do you think this is normal? See, whether your answer is a yes or a no or an I don't know, one thing is a fact. Climate change is real, it is affecting all lives, and we have to do something about it. Okay, maybe those are 3 facts. Nevertheless, my paper dives a little bit into doing something about this. Specifically, I investigated the prevailing operative systems of preservation within Intramuros' built heritage and presented an idea for its remodification in response to the contemporary issue on our environment. But before we get deeper into this topic, let us backtrack and first discuss what the problem is and why we should care. So before, the beings of the world were in a balanced state of mutualism. However, with the rise of industrialization and continuous innovation in technology, anthropogenic activities multiplied, reaching various parts of the world. Although this evolution has furthered human connections, it also unfortunately created a gap between the people and the environment. That is, human activities have radically shaped and altered the complex adaptive systems of the planet. So the effect of such is most notably seen through the phenomenon of climate change. Reports have shown how the rising of temperatures and extreme weather events around the globe. In the Philippines alone, we have experienced more typhoons with stronger wind intensity in the past decade. This then poses threats and risks to the properties, livelihood, and very life of our society. In light of this, the national government has joined international treaties such as the Paris Agreement to address and mitigate the impacts of climate change. Furthermore, it integrated the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations into the 2017 to 2022 Philippine Development Plan, or PDP. So one of its goals relating to the built environment is infrastructure development and health environment. This is envisioned to be an integral element in economic growth, human development, and recovery from COVID-19 pandemic. Yet, despite the seemingly collaborative nature of the two, the prevailing method in which they have been executed created a tension of conflict. Specifically, the Build, Build, Build program of the previous administration expedited the construction of numerous infrastructures, affecting the livelihoods of fisherfolks, farmers, and local communities in rural areas, as well as continually diminishing natural resources and displacing the urban poor and indigenous communities from their respective homes and ancestral lands. Thus, the environment and cultural sphere of the country continue to be at risk from the impacts of climate change and also at the name of development. So truly, building new infrastructures has been typically linked to the economic progress of a country. However, it is important to underscore how the two elements are not in a direct relationship, especially since sustainable development is at the core of the PDP. In fact, the converse process, heritage conservation, has been a well-grounded sustainable approach across the globe. In the Philippines, the built heritage are protected and promoted through the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009. In spite of this, the industry is still underdeveloped and underfunded by the government, leading to the demolition of some heritage structures. Hence, there is a loss of economic opportunity, space for learning and appreciation, and regeneration of materials. Nevertheless, the Philippines has still initiated a step forward in specialization by establishing the Intramuros Administration in 1979. The Intramuros Administration, or IA, focuses on the restoration and development of the walled city, Intramuros. Through this act, the adaptive reuse of some structures have been implemented. However, the preservation of such structures still follow the take, make, dispose approach of a linear economy. So, just to quickly expound on this concept, the linear economy design process is essentially one that collects raw materials and converts them into construction materials that are used until disposed of as a waste. Given how this method has been considered as a large contributor to climate change, sustainable design has slowly transformed into a circular design. So circular design is a closed-loop system that is restorative or regenerative by intention and design. It is typically witnessed through design approaches such as biomimicry and adaptive reuse. However, what makes a preservation process truly circular is the ability to completely eradicate waste through the sustenance of its value. And this is conventionally measured through the three sustainable pillars, namely economical, environmental, and social. As such, with the rising climate emergency, there is a pressure in the built heritage industry, including the IA, to adopt more eco-effective processes and principles. Thus, there is a pivot to the circular approach where the entire lifetime of a structure and its redevelopment should be thoroughly planned and implemented from start to the end. This study then essentially aims to introduce a circular economy framework in the preservation and development of the built environment in Intramuros. Specifically, it aims to determine and elucidate the prevailing systems of preservation and development in the walled city through an assessment of existing policies and its execution in the built environment and its local community, and create a relevant circular economy framework specific to the state and regulations within Intramuros. This is done by the synthesis of existing heritage frameworks, both internally and externally. So these were achieved by segmenting the research into three main steps, namely elucidate, determine, and produce. The elucidate phase aims to highlight the analysis on the existing systems and implementations of heritage frameworks. This subsequently enables the determine phase. Herein, it utilizes a thematic analysis to cross-analyze the data, which helps in identifying the common elements of the subject. And finally, the produce phase, which would then generate a circular framework for Intramuros. This is done through iterative comparison of the identified circular strategy themes. Essentially, each subphase is interconnected with one another, wherein it provides additional rationale for the findings and outputs of the research. With that, let us move to the first phase of the research. So according to the 2015 land use map of Intramuros, the walled city is a mixed-use zone composed of low-rise residential houses, institutional buildings, commercial spaces, plazas, idle lands, and abandoned buildings. However, at its core, the area is considered as one of the country's heritage zones. Specifically, the district illustrates its cultural significance through its historical, social, and aesthetic value. Given such richness, the intermingling of its inherent values with its current mixed-use characteristic necessitates a deeper contextualization of itself, not only to its past, but also to the contemporary society of today and tomorrow. So that said, part of this phase was to also identify the current social, economic, and environmental concerns within Intramuros. To briefly summarize, one of the main concerns the paper highlighted was the presence of informal settlers. Although considered as one of the city's underlying stakeholders, they are often described to contrast with the visual character of the walled city. This is mostly owed to how their houses do not conform with the widespread architecture of the place. Aside from this, issues concerning cleanliness and sanitation, as well as the water and electrical sources, were also frequently raised by the community themselves. As a result, the IA, along with the Housing and Urban Development Coordinating Council and the Social Housing Finance Corporation, have devised a socialized housing in which residents are given the voluntary decision to move out of their place. Yet, it is still important to highlight how these communities contribute to the contemporary social value of the place. Hence, it brings up certain concerns regarding gentrification of the district at the sake of built heritage preservation. However, issues such as this are not typically discussed in the laws and policies governing Intramuros, specifically that of the National Cultural Heritage Act of 2009 and the Presidential Decree number 1616. In the sense, these laws provide a general insight on how the proceedings of preservation and development goes. Additionally, the procedure is highly dependent on the organization or cultural agency in charge. As a result, it continually fails to communicate a specific archetype of standard by which the involved organizations and individuals should emulate. This has also been reflected in the Conservation Management Plan, or CMP, of Intramuros. That is, the design policies involving the preservation and development of its built heritage are projected towards an archaeological and restoration objective, and is essentially guided by the statement of significance that generally relates to its values as developed only during the colonial to World War periods of our history. This then further highlights how the current policies still stimulate the disconnect between the ongoing issues regarding the informal settlements and the development of the built heritage, despite how it recognizes conservation as a crucial component in the sustainable development of its communities, stakeholders, and the surrounding city of Manila. Overall, these elements are typically attributed to a linear design process, since the undertakings are bound to the past, current, and the near future developments of the walled city. So to innovate this, the final phase has determined the three pillars of sustainability as a dimension of a circular economy. To reiterate, this includes economic sustainability, which refers to the community's ability to independently develop and sustain itself with the available resources. Environmental sustainability, which refers to the productive use of natural resources, wherein there is a reduction of generated carbon emissions. And social sustainability, where there is a recognition of both physical and non-physical human needs that is developed in fair distribution and social justices. These factors aided in establishing the adaptive reuse framework as the best basis for circular principles to derive from. Additionally, since it is also already practiced in Intramuros, so this could just be further developed. These also underscore the importance of the interconnected relationship among these three, wherein the conservation and restoration of the built heritage directly integrates the preservation of its values with the responses to its current issues. So stemming from these are the specific elements encompassed by the dimensions. These are the actors by which the heritage revolves around or directly impacts. The final layer then depicts the existing and proposed integration of circular principles derived from the previous section. As you can see, current internal practices has been kept in the framework since these reflect the basic methods and principles in heritage conservation. Taking a step forward, the proposed framework includes intermediary consideration that further link each sector, particularly the encouragement of direct communication and involvement of primary stakeholders, including the informal settlements, so as to densify and manage the changing social value of Intramuros. In retrospect, this also provides economic opportunities and initiates heritage regeneration and recognition among all stakeholders. Condition surveys assessing the building's efficiency and lifespan are also suggested. This may illuminate applicable and reversible circular material and technology that would ultimately reduce carbon footprint and building costs. So to conclude, climate change is a very real event that is affecting all beings within this planet. Unfortunately, the built environment has largely contributed to the phenomenon, hence the need for a different method in preserving and developing its built heritage. It is evident how the current methodology primarily focuses on the preservation of its 19th century Spanish colonial character, which often overlooks the community that evolved within the walled city after the Second World War. So the proposed circular framework then provides the Intramuros Administration with a different lens in answering contemporary issues. That is, sustainable development is achieved through the integration and interconnectedness relationship of its social, environmental, and economic dimension. It is also through this in which concerned bodies can further represent the bigger picture of how each actor has a consequential effect and impact to another. Thus, it is in this analysis that true solutions be provided in an equitable manner. So with all that said, thank you for listening.
Okay, so thank you for that, Shane. Now to introduce our panel. So let's begin with architect Xander Lacson. Xander Lacson is an assistant professor at the University of on sustainable design, history of architecture, and heritage conservation. He currently teaches at the architectural communications and architectural design studios in the undergraduate program of the college. Xander started teaching in 2019 at the LaSalle College of St. Benilde's School of Design and Art, wherein he is an adjunct lecturer for architectural heritage conservation. Xander is an architect in private practice, and his portfolio is in interiors for the residential, retail, and hospitality sectors. In addition, Xander is a heritage consultant focusing on heritage and environmental impact assessments. He was most recently involved in consultancy for the Thang Long Imperial Citadel, a World Heritage Site in Hanoi, Vietnam. Xander completed his postgraduate degree in Sustainable Heritage at the Bartlett School's Institute for Sustainable Heritage in London in 2018, and in his undergraduate degree in Architecture at the University of the Philippines in 2008. The next member of our panel is architect Erik Akpedonu. He teaches art appreciation and Philippine colonial art and architecture at the Department of Fine Arts at the Ateneo de Manila University. He studied architecture at the Lippe University of Applied Sciences in Germany. Working in architectural bureaus in Germany, Ghana, and Malaysia, he participated in various construction projects in those countries and in the Middle East. As research associate of the Ateneo's Institute of Philippine Culture, he has been conducting extensive surveys of historic Philippine architecture, first in Bohol and later in Metro Manila as project manager, of the Architectural Heritage of Manila project. He has published extensively on heritage, culture, urbanism, architecture, and related topics, and is co-author with Sarina Saloma of Casa Boholana Vintage Houses of Bohol, published in 2011 by Ateneo de Manila University Press, and with Fernando Zialcita of Endangered Splendor, Manila's Architectural Heritage, 1571 to 1960, Volume 1, published in 2021 by Ateneo de Manila University Press. As a member of and officer of ICOMOS, he actively advocates the appreciation and preservation of the Philippines' rich built heritage. So we'll begin with Architect Lacson, then we'll move over to Architect Akpedonu. So, Sir Xander?
Hi, thank you, Christian. Good afternoon. Hi, Erik. Good afternoon. Good to meet you today. Good afternoon to everyone, most especially Shane and Jhoanna. Shane, I read through your paper, and I must say that your paper is very well written, very clear and concise, and it was very easy to digest. So congratulations on what you've done so far.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, just a few questions before I turn this over to Erik as well for his questions. Shane, could you probably, in your research, could you give more perhaps concrete examples on how the Intramuros Administration and its management of the property of Intramuros adheres to a linear economy, and what items specifically do you think those could be improved?
Okay. Right now, based on, essentially, I've only read the CMP that is specific to the built heritage. So the answer may change depending of I was able to read the entirety of the book. Nonetheless, from what I've noticed is that the linear design is typically seen through how they did apply adaptive reuse, but it is limited to the current technologies we have today, in which case, for instance, they use air conditioning units or the stuff that you would see outside of the architectural structure. And then aside from that, it's also disregarding at the moment the informal settlements, in which case they are usually encouraged to move out of Intramuros instead of keeping them or relocating them somewhere in the area, in which case that the architecture would be preserved. Yeah. Sorry, sir, you are.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Yeah. Now that we've already touched on the topic of informal settlers, I wanted to go on to my next question. Could you be perhaps a little bit more concrete as well on how do you think the issue on informal settlers can be integrated through a circular economy framework with Intramuros?
I believe they could be integrated by having a direct communication with them, since as of the moment, there are only surveys assessing what it is that they need or their current lifestyle and the such. If they are integrated into the planning as well as the overall development for Intramuros, then I think it would be able to become part of that circular principle proposed.
And through your presentation as well as in your paper, it seemed that you were still somewhat in doubt as to what value the informal settlers hold as stakeholders in the community of Intramuros. Could you explain more on that?
Yeah, I was quite in doubt because it would have been helpful if I was able to go inside and actually interview them. So my research is limited to reading through the news articles as well as other journal articles on what they could possibly hold. So from those readings, I was able to only in a way list out how they are able to contribute to some of the tourism jobs being applied in Intramuros. Aside from that, they also give the social value of the very essence of them living there. So that in itself is a social value and a stakeholder. Is a representation of why they are stakeholders of Intramuros. Yeah.
Right. And do you think that there are ways into integrating them more to hold an active role as stakeholders in the community of Intramuros? And are there any actions towards that to your knowledge?
As of the moment, I could not give a direct answer regarding this. However, I may reach out once again if I could further read on to the.
Okay. It seems that through your circular economy framework that you would like to suggest for Intramuros administration, it seems that you are promoting adaptive reuse as kind of like a primary solution or as a primary action that could probably contribute to this um, evolved and improved framework, right? Do you know the extents of how many properties or what properties there are within Intramuros that are easily suitable for this action?
Uh,
What are you aware of?
Unfortunately, I haven't reached that since the aim of the research is to only introduce the circular framework. Um,
Sure.
yeah, but then there are areas wherein the buildings are underutilized. So I
Right.
believe we could start there.
Okay. And finally, my last question is, based on your findings and recommendations, where can the Intramuros administration begin with in the implementation of your proposal? Where do you think the IA would have to focus on first and next?
Oh, I believe they could begin with they were having a direct communication with the informal settlements, since most of the reports have shown that they are considered as like the eyesore, since the houses that they built there isn't conforming with the overall character of Intramuros. So maybe they could begin there and assess where they could possibly be relocated within Intramuros still. And then it could be further developed if like they could provide, say, additional jobs related to tourism, if since that is mainly the source of income of Intramuros, or if not, the other small micro businesses in Intramuros.
Okay. Thank you so much, Shane. Eric, may I turn this over to you now? Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shane. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Shane. Interesting paper, I must say. Theoretically, certainly interesting. I would basically put the same points that my colleague architect Lacson already mentioned. While the paper is solid in theory, I would like to see a few specific examples of its application. Specifically, you wrote that currently the heritage practice in Intramuros still follows a linear pattern. And I would like you to give an example of that observation.
Oh, okay. The linear pattern is shown through how the adaptive reuse is still based off on the current technologies and how it still has a chance for it to become waste after its lifetime, as well as the how other structures are also being underutilized in a sense that there could be a potential for a space for learning, or for instance, a space for heritage regeneration in that sense.
Now, you mentioned adaptive reuse. Isn't adaptive reuse the quintessential example of a circular economy?
That is true. I was actually, this was the area of my concern when I was writing it. And I was trying to figure out how exactly, or why exactly their version of adaptive reuse is still linear. I guess it is also the reason why I based the circular framework that I created to be based on the adaptive reuse, because yeah, it is the quintessential example of a circular economy. But the reason why I considered it also linear is because it is, in a sense, underused, because most of the adaptive reuse are for offices only, so it does not really generate to the entire stakeholders. So the perspective that I wanted to give to the audience is how it could also be used for the social value, or like the development of the social value of Intramuros.
Could you give an example of adaptive reuse in Intramuros?
As of the current moment.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I believe I wasn't able to create or provide an example in the paper. And right now I do not have an example to give. I'm sorry, but I may be able to send it to you once I have an example.
Yeah, I'm just asking that because most of the buildings in Intramuros, as you certainly know, are not original. They were built mostly in the 1970s to 1990s.
Yeah.
So in a way, they still follow their original use for which they were designed. Adaptive reuse would really apply to buildings whose original function have been fundamentally changed. And right now, I can't think of any example, maybe with the exception of Fort Santiago, which was turned from a military installation and barracks into a museum. You may want to look for more examples in Intramuros. Okay, let's leave it as such. I would rather like to ask another question. I think my colleague, architect Lacson, already touched on that, but I would like to reiterate it. Could you give an example of a circular economy specifically as it applies to heritage?
Circular. The circular economy that is directly applied in heritage, aside from adaptive reuse, would that be your question?
Yes.
Aside from adaptive reuse, it would most likely fall under the usage of circular materials and design strategies that would illustrate the life cycle from start to finish and how it could be recycled and reused all throughout. If that makes sense.
Okay. Can you give an example of a functioning example, maybe in some other country, maybe in Europe or elsewhere in Asia, where this has been applied?
The circular economy.
Heritage.
As of right now, the scope of my research was not able to reach out the specific examples across the Philippines. However, based on my research, most of it is only applied in academic or is mostly popular in academic setting as of the moment.
Okay. Well, you may want to add a few examples from the Philippines or Asia or the West, if you like, in order to underpin your series. Like I said, the series makes sense, but I think they need to be supported by precise examples to illustrate the points that you want to bring across. With regards to the translocation of informal settlers, you mentioned that there are plans to translocate them. I'm not sure whether those plans are up to date. What I do know is that a couple of years ago, there were serious plans to actually relocate the squatters within Intramuros. There were actually plans developed by the Intramuros Administration to set up socialized housing in Intramuros to accommodate the remaining remnants of the informal settlers. You may want to look whether those plans are still pursued at this point in time. I know there's a new administrator coming in, so you may want to check with him what are the plans. What we do know is that the translocation of informal settlers, not only in Intramuros, has proven over the long run not to be very successful, for the simple reason that there are no jobs in the relocation sites, which are usually far away from any urban centers. And so this is a non-working concept. The latest thing is to really relocate on site, and I think that is what the IA is still currently pursuing, but you may want to check on that. I would like to also reiterate that including the informal settlers in any development plans of Intramuros may not necessarily lead to a circular economy in the material sense. It is actually quite likely that the aspirations, the plans, the visions of the informal settlers may be quite the opposite, participating in the mainstream consumer society rather than pursuing ecological ways, which are more commonly associated with the middle and elite class rather than with the labor class. So it's a tricky thing. I know it's popular to wanting to involve the community, but it is by no means assured that involving the community will lead to a sustainable or agreeable development. To give an example, we once did an interview with a number of mayors and ask them in Bohol and ask them what is their ambition for their development, for their communities. And the answer we received from at least one of them was, let's have a shopping mall. So be careful. You might not get what you are wishing for.
Okay.
Finally, with regards of involving the local community in terms of livelihood, I would like to point out that the Ateneo is currently pursuing a program to further their training as informal tour guides, to give them opportunities in that regard. So we are on it, and I hope we can pursue it later this year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Shane. Thank you, Sir Xander. Thank you, Erik. So we'll now move on to our next presentation. Okay. Okay. So the next presentation is entitled The Potential Impact of the Parex Proposal on the Cultural Significance of Intramuros. This study aims, as the title straightforwardly says, to assess the potential impacts of the Parex Proposal on Intramuros value. For this, we will have Jhoanna, Angeline, Zialcita. Angeline is a De La Salle College of St. Benilde undergraduate student pursuing a Bachelor of Science in Architecture. She took up a specialization in architectural heritage conservation in college, which enabled her interest in Philippine architecture history. During her heritage studies, she was exposed to cultural mapping and conservation methods. Through a series of research papers in her heritage class, she was able to hone her skills in research development and historical analysis. She is also an architecture apprentice during the writing of this paper, incorporating the concepts of environmental planning and history studies. Her experience in architecture has provided a lens on significance of historic urban landscapes in this paper. So without further ado, Angeline, the floor is yours.
I'll just share my screen. So can you see my screen, Bob? Oh, wait, new share. You just wait for the screen to pop up. So good day, everyone. I'm Jhoanna Angeline Zialcita, and today I'll be presenting my research study titled "The Potential Impact of the Parex Proposal on the Cultural Significance of Intramuros." So I'd like to start off with a quote from Rob Creer, and he says, "Any planning innovation in a city must be governed by the logic of the whole, and in design terms, must offer a formal response to pre-existing conditions." So with this, Intramuros is the product of the Spanish colonial government's 16th century establishment of Ciudad de Manila as the country's political, religious, and administrative capital. The Spaniards formed their city in the same location where the voyagers discovered this palisaded town. Intramuros was built on the site of Raja Soliman's 13th century trading center, which was surrounded by a wooden wall and situated on the beach of Manila Bay near the Pasig River's mouth. They expanded the original palisade built by the displaced natives at the mouth of the Pasig River and built a defensive wall around their new settlement. During World War II, bombing raids almost completely obliterated Intramuros. It is now partially rebuilt and continues to be preserved in its historical setting through conservation efforts and now appreciated primarily for its built heritage. The built environment of Intramuros witnessed a shift in urban modernization, with the development of urban areas in the Philippines seeing a massive change in infrastructure. The highly populated networks of business emerged rapidly in the past few decades. Metro Manila is challenged by the millions of citizens circulating it, resulting from economic shifts that attract new opportunities. The city of Manila, the city location of Intramuros, has a total population of 1.85 million people according to the 2020 PSA statistics. Metro Manila experiences heavy traffic congestion. One of the roots of this problem stems from high population density. In response to the traffic crisis, San Miguel Corporation, also known as SMC, Infrastructure, in partnership with Philippine National Construction Corporation, also known as PNCC, proposed to build an elevated highway, officially called Pasig River Expressway or Parex. The Parex proposal is projected to run along the Pasig River adjacent to Intramuros. Throughout the years, the built environment of Intramuros continues to be developed as a representation of Filipino national identity. The challenge to redevelop Intramuros has lingered long before the creation of the Intramuros Administration. The commitment to restore and develop a historical site requires a well-rounded understanding of its history. It is imperative that the layers of culture Intramuros represents are efficiently maintained in pursuit of national pride. So this study aims to identify the cultural significance of Intramuros that could potentially fill the gap missing in the environmental assessment of the Parex proposal. It centers on the Parex rationale to provide historical context between Intramuros and the Pasig River. It provides an understanding of the values that are essential in developing the built environment of cultural heritage. This study seeks to provide justification for protecting Intramuros from the potential risk of environmental development. It is a response to the proposed Pasig River Expressway project. So linking now Parex and Intramuros. Starting off with the environmental setting of Intramuros. So just a brief introduction about it. The walled city became the capital city of the Philippines during the Spanish colonial period. Its city layout assemble a grid planning structure made up of streets and a citadel. The city is shaped like an arbitrary pentagon, with the longest side located on the western region, which used to face Manila Bay but is now reclaimed as a port area. Its next longest side faces the Pasig River, as you can see on this picture. From the foot of the Jones Bridge up to the ruins of the Intendencia, a strip of buildings lines the bank of the Pasig River. The river bank can be seen on the direction to the reconstructed Maestranza Cortina with views of the Escolta and San Nicolas. Today, conservation practices include challenges unique to Intramuros. The Intramuros community also sits across Binondo, becoming inseparable in their existence. Its relationship remains intact between the banks of the Pasig River, with commercial development in both communities intertwined with tourism, education, and of course, businesses. So Intramuros has evolved for over 400 years as a cultural heritage of Manila City. It stands as a premier historical landmark of the Philippines. Its rich cultural legacy roots in its history of political, economic, social, architectural, and religious significance. Much of its history stems from the colonial period, and majority of this under the Spanish rule. So the cultural significance of Intramuros is assessed with 5 categories. So there's the political, social, architectural, spiritual, and socio-economic value. Overall, Intramuros displays a unique setting that retains the beauty of Manila's colonial history of governance, religion, architectural technology, and social construct. Its fortifications contain institutions that became one of the most influential religious bodies in the Philippines. The Catholic churches in Intramuros continue to function as a center of religious activity up to the present. The economic activities of Intramuros today is combined with educational institutions, offices, and tourism tied to its cultural legacy. So the urban development of Extramuros, the Parex Proposal. So here is a picture of the alignment of the Parex project across the Intramuros border. As you can see, the expressway is designed to connect at the R10 interchange connected to Intramuros. With the growing pace of urbanization in the Philippines, cultural heritage faces the problem of preservation. The shift towards contemporary art forms weakens the authenticity of built heritage and its environment. San Miguel Corporation, also known as SMC Infrastructure, proposes to construct the Pasig River Expressway, a 6-lane, all-elevated expressway that will run the length of the Pasig River. The Pasig River alignment begins west of Metro Manila in the neighborhoods of San Nicolas and Intramuros. The project's goal is to alleviate traffic congestion and create a convenient alternative route between Metro Manila's major business districts. So the Parex rationale, they use the Philippine Development Plan as a backbone to its project objective. The Philippine Development Plan states that the ultimate purpose for the infrastructure sector in the medium term is to expedite infrastructure development and ensure that operations of infrastructure systems and facilities will be sustained. While the San Miguel Corporation identifies the growing need for the Philippine economy to grow by boosting the infrastructure development in metro regions, it fails to address other important factors that were recognized under the Philippine Development Plan, such as in Chapter 7. In Chapter 7 of the Philippine Development Plan, it's categorized as promoting Philippine culture and values, and it states the government will increase the level of cultural awareness, inculcate values for the common good, cultivate creativity, and amplify national pride among Filipinos. These will be resonated in development plans across all levels of government. These will likewise be supported by adequate resources, capacity building for government agencies on culture sensitivity, and increased engagement with stakeholders. So SMC continues to persist that the economy and environment will benefit more from the alignment on the Pasig River, stating that the visual impairments on the environment will only last during the construction phase. It's important to note that the visual and physical impact on linear parks and other land uses will be permanent once operational, rather than temporary during construction. It's recommended that existing and planned riverside development be communicated with the respective LGUs. So here is an artistic render of the Parex project, courtesy of Renacimiento Manila, and it's illustrating what the future of Intramuros could look like with the manifestation of the Parex project. With this, I'll be discussing heritage policies in relation to the assessment of the Parex impact on Intramuros. So SMC, they made a bold statement in regards to its proposed highway plan, stating that Parex is the only alternative source of mobility in Metro Manila. Although it may solve one layer of the traffic problem, it fails to evaluate the repercussions of its development on historical landmarks that fall victim to its path, such as the one rendered in this photo. So I chose an international heritage policy in criticism of the Parex rationale. The Venice Charter states that it's a responsibility to safeguard historical figures for future generations to appreciate in its authentic state. A historic urban or rural setting is defined as one that contains evidence of a specific civilization, a notable development, or a historic event that has gained cultural significance over time. And a great example of this is Intramuros. The proposed highway along the Pasig River will further damage the authentic state of Intramuros' environmental setting. If Parex were to be built, it would block the views of the heritage structures from the river view. Visions of the Jones Bridge will be shadowed by a concrete highway on top, severely ruining the monuments of Filipino history. So ICOMOS Philippines, they hosted an online event titled Pamanong Pasig, an impact assessment of the Parex. And in the event, they talk about the significance of preserving scenic landscapes in order to preserve not only the physical environment, but also to protect what the Pasig River symbolizes for different stakeholders that are affected by the Parex proposal. The president of ICOMOS Philippines, Tina Paterno, she made a statement in light of this situation stating, from the ICOMOS perspective, its construction will adversely impact the environment, health, and cultural life of Manileños. We can always build freeways, but we cannot build a river. We are not anti-development. We support progress, but the Parex project is not a sustainable development. Another heritage policy is RA number 597. It declares that Fort Santiago shall be reconstructed as closely as possible along the lines of the original structure. Its surroundings shall be reserved for a national plaza of the unknown hero, which shall include the Ayuntamiento and the site occupied by the former palace of the Spanish governors general. Intramuros and its walls are declared a national historical monument. The proposed Parex project of San Miguel Corporation runs closely to the perimeter of Fort Santiago, as you can see in this picture rendered by Assorted Edge via Twitter. So this has the potential to interrupt the built heritage of Intramuros. It stands to reason that obstructing the views of the walled city violates its rights to conservation. In conclusion, the historic urban landscape of Intramuros can be defined as a complex mixture of Filipino heritage and contemporary Filipino identity, seen through the converging landscapes of ultra-modern infrastructure and heritage buildings. It allows for one to wonder how can Filipinos protect their cultural heritage through the age of urban development. This paper studied the interconnection of the historic urban landscape of Intramuros and its relationship to a modern landscape. It amplifies the threats against its cultural values from the proposed Parex project. This paper is a response to SME's claims on the project proposal to be conducive to safeguarding heritage identity when it lacks substance in its environmental impact assessment on historical monuments. In my recommendations, I have four, but I'll emphasize two for today. So the first one is for the community. I urge that the community to continue the conversation on Filipino heritage landscapes. It's important that the local community strives to question urban development in different forms and take into consideration the sustainability of Filipino heritage. It's also pertinent to value constructive criticism of urban development and understand the environmental impact it may serve on its surrounding community. And for the Parex project proponent, it's recommended that a heritage impact assessment be conducted first to examine the potential threats to the cultural significance of Intramuros and other historical landmarks along the path of the Parex construction. So this is yet to be done. And as a Filipino brand, San Miguel Corporation should acknowledge the irreversible damage to cultural heritage that its project can induce. So thank you so much for listening. And here's my references for some of the statements I made. And then also photo credits to the owners and artists of the photos used in this presentation.
Okay, so thank you, Angeline, for that presentation. We'll now go now to the panel discussion again. We'll now start with Sir Erik, then proceed to Sir Xander. So, Sir Erik.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Christian. Yeah, thank you, Angeline. That was a pretty comprehensive overview. You have worked out some of the problems of the Parex on heritage, although I would like to expand on the points you raised. But before anything else, let's quickly talk about a few of the statements that are contained in your paper, which I beg to disagree. The first one is you say that the contemporary art forms may be a threat to preservation of built heritage. That is not really the case. Contemporary art forms can blend very well with heritage and heritage structures. It's a matter of respecting each other. If we look at cities like London or Paris, take for example the Louvre, which has a super hyper modern pyramid in the center, yet everyone will agree with me that the Louvre pyramid by I.M. Pei has improved the Louvre rather than diminished its heritage qualities. It's a matter of design, it's a matter of sensitivity. So contemporary art forms are not necessarily a threat to heritage. In fact, they can even enhance it. Having said that, by the way, highways are not exactly a modern form of contemporary infrastructure. In fact, they are a model on the way out. We'll come to that in a moment. Another thing is, you said the cause for the perennial traffic jam in Manila is the high population density. Here again, I would like to question that. It's not only the numbers, because most of those people do not drive cars. We have only about 20% of households in Manila that drive cars, 80% use public transport, and that is exactly where the problem lies, and where also one of the problems with Parex lies. The high traffic in Manila is not caused by population density, but by the near complete absence of a meaningful public mass transport system. We are talking about LRT, subways, trains. We have them, but they are totally inadequate for a city of nearly 15 million people. They are simply not enough. Another thing is we have plenty of gated subdivisions, which force pretty much all traffic on a few arteries like C5 or ETSA. And therefore, once they are choked, that's the end of it. It's another problem. With regards to Parex, that means by building another highway, we may actually witness the effect of what is known as induced traffic. Build it and they will use it without necessarily solving the problem. In fact, I think it will make the traffic in Manila worse rather than better. Another thing is, before we come to the main points, you mentioned the communities. The community is always a buzzword that always goes around when it comes to discussing projects, pro and con. Communities are usually poorly defined. And as I already mentioned in the previous paper, if you really ask the community, you might not get the answer that you might want. Because a lot of the community may actually speak out in favor of projects, infrastructure, and developments that may not be beneficial to the city as a whole. Okay. Talking again about the Pasig River. As you mentioned, it has massive impact on the visuals of the built heritage. That is certainly a given, and I totally agree. However, I would like to also expand it on other aspects. Not only will it obstruct important views, like, for example, the important relationship between Manila and Binondo. The Pasig River is the heart of Manila. It's the heart of the Philippines, so to speak. Without Pasig, there would be no Intramuros. Without Pasig, there would be no Binondo. Driving a highway between the two, like a wedge, basically disregards the entire evolution of Manila and Metro Manila. But the river is not just a photo bomber. It also has impact on noise. Who wants to live next to a highway? Certainly I don't. It will have massive emissions in terms of smoke, of dust, of particles. So this is another aspect. It will certainly negatively affect the parks and rivers. The park itself by the river, but the river itself also, because it would be reduced to a gutter. Vistas, you mentioned vistas. The vista is not only from one side of the river to the other, it's also the vista along the river. Looking down the river, either towards Marikina or towards the Bay of Manila, would be totally destroyed. Who wants to see a highway when you could have a riverscape? What can happen to vistas? Vistas are commonly ignored in Manila. We have so many great vistas, but many of them have been ruined beyond recognition. A recent example, and one of the worst, is the Paco Station. You might have heard about the American era Paco Station, a miniature version of Penn Station in New York City, now totally obstructed in view by the new highway that is built smash in front of it. In the past, you would have a 6-lane street approaching the station, a grand vista, and then you would have this very imposing monument. Now you can't see it because it's obstructed by a forest of concrete columns. carrying the elevated highway. Would we want to do that? Would anyone build over the river of the Seine? Would the people of Paris ever build a highway over the Seine in France? They surely wouldn't. Why wouldn't they do it? Not only would it destroy the streetscape, it will also dramatically reduce and destroy the quality of life of everyone living in Paris. If they don't do it, and we know they wouldn't do it, why do we think it's okay to do it in Manila? For something that benefits only a small minority. So while it is true that the Parex will negatively impact on heritage, I think the biggest problem with it that it basically will diminish the quality of life for pretty much every Malinenyo, everyone in Metro Manila. Highways over rivers are a concept that is definitely on the way out. You may want to mention in your paper the example that was in Seoul, where a highway was built over the river that cuts through the city center, which was recently demolished, and the river was re-naturalized, now becoming a kilometer-long linear park in the heart of Seoul. You may want to mention in your paper the experience in Tokyo, the Nihonbashi, which is also due to be demolished, another highway that was built over a river in the inner city, and will be renaturalized in the oncoming years. Building highways over a river is a concept that may have been popular in the 60s and 70s, but certainly has no place in the 21st century. Sorry for expounding so much on it, but you may want to add those points to your paper, which otherwise I find very insightful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Erik.
Sorry for talking so much.
It's okay. It's very insightful.
Thank you, Erik. Okay, so hi, Jhoanna. I read your paper, and just like Shane, you've done very well in your paper. Your paper was very well written, very concisely written. So congratulations on that. My first question already actually has been touched on by Erik, and he gave a lot of very good examples, but let me just repeat my question to you because you might have your own take on it. Can you explain further regarding the integral relationship that the heritage site has with its environmental setting, and what exactly are these for Intramuros? I noticed that in your paper, you focused heavily on disruption of views and view lines, but what else will the Parex project potentially affect with Intramuros and its environmental setting?
Well, there's two that I could think of right now. First off, it's his historical aspect. When it was discovered, it was actually through the voyagers of Spaniards. They discovered Intramuros and realized how nice the location is because it's a perfect location for trading. So trading actually affected the economic activity of the people, and this attracted people to populate the city. And also a second one that I could think of is like what Sir Erik mentioned earlier, it can affect the way of living of people. So based on the artistic renders in my presentation, as you can see, the proposed elevated highway, it sits on top of the Pasig River, right? And it's also right beside residential communities. So like what Sir Erik said, the impact of the noise and the smoke accumulated from the cars can greatly impact how they live. And this can also affect the material of the structures in Intramuros. This can affect what the paint looks like. Its maintenance might have to be more rigorous to keep up with the traffic jams in Parex.
Right. Okay. Thank you, Jhoanna. And for my next question, somewhere in your paper, you wrote that tourist impressions determine the architectural and cultural value of buildings. How does this hold true, or how is this applicable to Intramuros? And what are these impressions that you have collected already?
Well, it depends on a number of factors because sometimes tourism may rely on aesthetic values, and that's highly subjective based on an individual. But there's this one research study I found wherein they took a test out of the Oxford guests, and they realized that one of the number one reasons why people visit Oxford is because of its architectural presence. It's not so much combined with random hints of modernism, and it's nicely preserved. So that may be a great effect in its high value in tourism.
Right. Okay, and Jhoanna, finally for my last question, I do agree a lot with Professor Erik regarding that proposals like the Parex seems to be stopgap measures to really solve the wider problem, which is lack of mass rapid transport. However, it seems that from your paper, you are saying that the Parex proposal lacks a heritage impact assessment report as a component for it, right? Apart from that, do you have any ideas top of mind on how the motivations of the Parex proposal can be pursued together with the interests of Intramuros?
One thing that I can think of right now is profit for the state
Profit,
because it's
okay.
privately owned by San
Yeah.
Miguel Corporation.
Right. Is there anything else, do you think, how you could combine the interests of the project with that of Intramuros?
Maybe also networking because the San Miguel Corporation, for the Parex proposal, they are in partnership with a number of stakeholders. So there's the PNCC, the RHR consultancy services. So they really want to expand their business network to gain more profit possibly.
Right. Okay. Well, that's all for now. Thank you so much, Jhoanna, and congratulations on your, I think Erik has a question. Yes, Erik?
Yeah, sorry, if I just could add two more points, what you mentioned in the paper. You said the recommendation would be a heritage impact assessment. While it is certainly a good idea to have one, the fact that one is being made doesn't say anything about that any of those recommendations in that assessment would be implemented. In fact, in my personal opinion, the only recommendation to Parex can be, please don't do it. Even if we have a heritage impact assessment, I don't think there can be any measures that would mitigate the massive impact it has visually, but more importantly on the urban setting and urban context of Intramuros and Binondo. By the way, in your paper, you talk heavily about vistas. The truth is that Intramuros, actually, of all the affected districts, is actually not so much affected as other areas in terms of visuals, in terms of vistas. No? What would be affected would be the view, for example, of the post office across the Pasig River, would be the view of Escolta from the Amita side, would be Jones Bridge. The riverfront of Intramuros, aside from Fort Santiago, doesn't really have many heritage structures from the Spanish period, perhaps with the exception of the Chamber of Commerce. So with regards to the recommendations, heritage impact assessment, very good, but the only proper answer here can be, please don't do it. If at all, then maybe you want to think of a system that is really 21st century and that can only be public mass transport. Sorry, that's all.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, so thank you, Angeline. Thank you, Sir Xander, and thank you, Sir Erik. We'll now open the floor for questions from the audience. As a recap, Shane proposed a cultural economy framework for Intramuros in view of the current climate change that we are experiencing and the calls for sustainable development. Meanwhile, Angeline presented the context of Intramuros and the rationale for Parex proposal and her assessment of how this controversial project can affect the value of Intramuros vis-a-vis several international heritage policies. You may use the Q&A button at the bottom of our screen, and please let us know to whom your question is directed, to Shane, to Angeline, or to both of them. So, okay, we already have 3 questions in the Q&A box. Okay, the first one is not a question actually. From Regional Tour Guide Violeta and Munoz. She's saying, in answer to the question of Professor Erik, one example of adaptive reuse in East Asia would be how Kaohsiung, Taiwan has transformed empty warehouses into museums or galleries. So I think this is in relation to Shane's presentation and on adaptive reuse. So Shane or Sir Erik, do you have any comment on that?
Actually, the question was more like examples of adaptive reuse in Intramuros. Of course, there are many examples in Southeast Asia. In fact, there are even many here in Metro Manila. Not just think of Tutuban Station. Think of the many heritage houses that have been converted into B&Bs or fine dining restaurants. In Intramuros, currently I can only think of Fort Santiago and the Comelec building, by the way, which is behind the Palacio del Gobernador, which used to be the part of the judicial complex before World War II. Other than that, I'm hard pressed to think of any, but I'll keep on thinking.
Okay, so thank you, sir. Another question from an anonymous attendee. So this is quite interesting. To Ms. Zialcita, how can we use your research findings about the negative impacts of Parex and convert it into public information or instructional materials, especially in Araling Panlipunan, where they learn geography, especially to elementary pupils? This is quite an interesting question. So, Angeline?
That is an interesting question, given that the Parex project has only taken place in a matter of less than 2 years. So there's still a lot of ongoing debate between the public and the San Miguel Corporation. So maybe to answer this, it can give an insight to be more sensitive to the environment in which you want to propose a massive infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Another question from Regional Tour Guide Violeta and Munoz. I wish to know the status of Parex. Is the project still under the planning stage or has the project been approved already? Would you happen to know, Angeline?
Yes, sir. So thanks for the question. Okay, so San Miguel Corporation, they're still waiting for the approval of the Parex project. And at the moment, the corporation is conducting a cleanup project of the Pasig Tulihan River. So they were able to remove like 1.12 million tons of waste from the Tulihan River in preparation for the construction of the expressway.
Thank you. So for Shane, for us laymen, can you give us an idea on the extent of how built heritage contributes to climate change, as you mentioned earlier?
Built heritage, or most likely built environment, contributes to climate change in a sense that the overall carbon emissions it emits from the beginning to the end contributes to at least 39% of the total global emissions. So for instance, that is bringing the materials into the construction site or the very materials they used in the structure.
Okay, Sir Erik is raising his hand. Sir?
What Shane said, for example, the production of cement is enormously energy intensive. It produces enormous amounts of CO2. And quite apart, because many of our buildings nowadays are not designed in a very ecological way, unlike the traditional architecture, things like the Bahay na Bato or the Bahay Kubo, rely heavily on air conditioning, which is super energy intensive, rely on artificial lighting. Then, of course, we have all the functions like escalators, elevators, maintaining buildings. All of those are enormous. You can say that the built environment contributes, if you include maintenance and operation, about 50% of global carbon emissions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so another question for Angeline. One criticism that constantly gets thrown at heritage advocates is that they are anti-development. What is your take on that?
Like what Miss Nina Paterno, the ICOMOS Philippines president, said, they're not anti-development. They just want to make sure that those who do develop infrastructure in the Philippines have an overall comprehensive analysis on the different impacts their proposed development would have. In this case, there's a
Okay.
lot of negative implications.
Okay. Sir Erik?
Well, just like I mentioned earlier when I commented, I think we can all agree that cities like Barcelona, like Paris, like London are super modern, totally progressive, but they don't deny heritage. The thing is that heritage advocates are not anti-progress. At least the vast majority are not. There may be a few hardcore who are, but I am sure that 90% are quite open to development and progress. The matter is how we integrate it. Do we demolish the old to replace with new, or do we rather preserve the old and integrate the new? That is what cities like Barcelona, Paris, Rome, London do, creating streetscapes that are super progressive, modern, contemporary, at the same time are very pleasing and preserve the heritage. Progress and heritage are not opposites. They go hand in hand, but it must be well done.
Thank you, sir. For Shane, what is your take on that? Maybe you can connect that with sustainable development or the circular economy.
Sorry, sir. Can you repeat the question?
It's about the criticism that gets constantly thrown at heritage advocates that they are anti-development. So, what is your take on that?
I quite agree with their answers, most especially since heritage conservation in itself is a step towards development. It's just so happens that it's not something that's truly creating, something new, but rather it's conserving. So this also helps with climate change in a sense that you are reusing the materials and therefore you are also reducing your carbon footprint in the construction in general. So yeah, it's not anti-development.
Okay, thank you. So, another question for you. You have mentioned earlier that as of the present, circular economy framework is only popular within academic spheres. In your opinion, why is that so?
I believe it is only popular in the academic realm because it's a very complicated process. Since in circular economy, you have to think from the beginning to the end. So this would require many multidisciplinary fields. So that could prove another challenge to why it's difficult to have it or to apply it in real life. Nonetheless, it shows that we do have to do it though, because climate change is really impacting us in so many ways that we cannot. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So, perhaps this will be the last question for today, and this is for Angeline. This is in connection with Architect Lacson's question earlier. So, in the event that this project unfortunately pushes through, can you propose an alternative to minimize the effects of the project? So, his question earlier was, how can you how can you mitigate the effects on the project
Well,
on
if the Parex proposal were to be manifested in the upcoming years, um, the surrounding environment of Intramuros still has a lot of improvements to go. So, for example, the local government unit can still focus on the sidewalks, the access for pedestrians to improve the circulation of people and not just the vehicles alone.
okay. So, I think that's all for today. So, Sir Eric.
This question is tantamount to the question, what is the mitigating measure for a punch in the face? There is no mitigating measure. We can paint Parex in green, but that will not make it any better. The truth is there are hardly any mitigating measures to reduce the massive impact this proposal has. Once it's built, it will be there. Whether all those proposed sidewalks and bicycle lanes will be built is questionable. They don't make sense anyway, as has been proven by various other speakers. I'm sorry, but the only measure to avoid a punch in the face is to, well, not to receive it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. To end this presentation, any final message from our interns? So, Shane?
I guess my final message would be just in general, I would like to thank you because I think I would not be able to finish and accomplish this entire paper without your guidance, as well as I hope everyone would reconsider or just change your view on how heritage conservation here in the Philippines is. And I hope we could further elevate it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. For Angeline?
So for the viewers, I hope they take an interest in heritage urban landscapes. And for our guest jurors, Sir Erik and Sir Xander, I'd like to extend my gratitude to you two. I've learned a lot from a span of 2 hours today, and I'm very grateful that you were able to review and provide feedback on my research study. And then, of course, thank you as well to Sir Christian for mentoring me and for being the #1 guide in writing this paper. Thank you po.
Thank you. Okay, so from our panelists, so Sir Erik, any message to our interns?
On a technical level, keep it up. Please provide more precise examples to make the paper relevant and also easier to read for those who are not experts. The theory behind it is solid in both cases, but requires examples from the Philippines, from Asia, from the rest of the world to make it more easily understandable and to grasp the concepts behind it. That is from a technical one. From personal level, I'm glad you picked up those topics because they're important. A circular economy is super important. Without a circular economy, there is no chance for this planet. The produce, use, and throw away economy that we have been using for the past 50 years cannot even go on for a few more decades without trashing the entire planet. So what you picked on, Shane, is a very important topic. So please build upon it and expand it. And what I already mentioned about Parex, I think is pretty clear and likewise an important topic that requires and should receive much more public discussion and media coverage than it actually does. So I'm glad Jhoanna picked it up, so we have a few more words to add to it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir Xander.
Yes, thank you, Christian. To Shane and to Jhoanna, congratulations on your paper. And I've seen how both of you have grown as students, especially in the heritage field for the past year. So congratulations with all your effort. And I would just like to echo all the recommendations that our other panelist, Professor Erik Akpedonu, has suggested to you. These are very topical issues, and it's really great that you picked up on it. So congratulations to Jhoanna and to Shane. Hello again to Erik and Christian. Thank you so much for inviting us to be a part of this event today. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, sir, and congratulations to our interns, to our panelists. We are very grateful for joining us here. Okay, so that's all for today's intern talk, and thank you everyone for joining us in our second intern talk for this year. We will have another intern talk on September 19, Monday. That will be a full day presentation. And stay tuned for the registration link and the announcement. And also for the latest updates about Intramuros, join our Viber community by scanning the QR code here or following the link bit.ly/IA Viber. This is also posted on our social media accounts. And lastly, I'd like to promote our social media pages. The Intramuros Administration is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And that is all for now. So thank you, everyone.
Thank
Very
you.
much.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Thank you.